Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to explore in this video how to make a transfer from a printout or a drawing onto canvas. So first of all, we need some vine charcoal. It's quite a soft charcoal, sometimes called willow charcoal. And we just snap off a small piece. And then we take it over to our printout or our drawing, and this is a sacrificial printout, right? So you might not be able to use it after you coat it in charcoal. So we coat the back and we just try and give a smooth, even coverage all over the back of the area of the design that we want to transfer. Like so. Doesn't take long, pretty easy. Watch out for paper that's too waxy. Charcoal doesn't like that. So then we take our canvas and we have some low tack masking tape or decorator's tape, and we place the image where we want to make the transfer, and we just tape one side of the printout. We don't have to tape every side, because we want to be able to lift it up on the corner and see how our work is going and if we're getting all the information that we need. And we use a nice crispy sharp HB pencil, or we can use a pen, biro, ballpoint, but HB pencil with a good point works the best. So then the first thing we do is go around the major shapes, the outline of the object. We don't start with the little details, we get the big shapes first. And as you can see, the paper's going a little bit out of alignment here, so you have to sometimes, just put your finger down and keep the paper in place. And start from the major outline and then work from general to specific. So once you get the big shapes, you start working on the kind of second largest shapes. Notice I'm not getting my hand pressing down on the paper because we don't want to end up with like a paw print on our design. So I'm making sure that my hand is working from the outside of the paper and just trying not to press too much with my hand when I'm balancing the pencil. So I'm using my little finger there to just pivot my hand on. And so we're just looking at a time lapse here of me doing all of this work. And you see that I'm not shading with the pencil, that I'm just using the lines to capture the main kind of structural details and the divisions of light and dark. I'm not bothering in this design to capture all of those tiny little patterns because I'm thinking when it comes to painting them, I'm going to be more kind of alluding to those patterns and kind of freehanding some of it. But I'm getting enough of the structure in that I need to give me clues when I'm referring to the printout or the photograph or the design. When I'm referring to that when I'm painting it, I've got enough details in to clue me in to the correct position of areas of light and dark and so on. So I lifted it up there to see how I'm doing, and yeah, just carrying on, getting everything in. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Pretty good. I'm going to sharpen my pencil, get it really pointy for those fine details of the face. So I'm really trying to hit the mark when it comes to things like facial features and important parts of the anatomy like the hands, because a stitch in time saves 9. If I get my design accurately transferred, it means that I'm not introducing copying errors into the process. And basically, if I get the correct placement of things like eyes and noses and mouth, I'm making life easier for myself. So when it comes to this kind of thing, I'm really concentrating on making sure I hit the mark, so I don't have harder work later. And where it's softer divisions of light and dark, I'm using small dashes of the pencil rather than hard lines. So. Okay, so I'm lifting the printout off, and I'd like to keep this printout because I can use it as a reference for when it comes to painting the light and shadow. So yeah, I'll keep that around. And now I'm going to take a putty rubber and I'm going to do what's called ghosting the lines. And this can be done actually after the inking in, but sometimes if I feel like I've got an excess of charcoal on the canvas, I just dab it off with this putty rubber, softly reducing the amount of carbon, so that really I'm looking to avoid smearing the charcoal when I'm inking in. So sometimes I find just dabbing some off works for me, and any stray pieces, any stray patches of charcoal that have come off. So here's our India ink. We're looking for a traditional shellac based India ink. It's very strong carbon black in shellac, and we're using a liner brush, which as you can see has got these longer, very fine hairs. This allows us to pull long lines. So I get the India ink, and it's quite useful to have one of these droppers around in a little pot or a jar. And I'm just using the dropper to take quite a small amount of ink because it's really concentrated. So I'm just actually dispensing 3 drops here of the India ink. I don't need too much at all. And then I'm putting the rest of the ink back in the jar, rinsing the dropper through, and then just getting 2 or 3 drops of water. The reason why we water it down is we don't want the black lines to be too strong and end up punching up through the painting, the delicate paint film. So we water it down so it's a bit more like a dark grey. Now I advise you, if you're new to a liner brush, to practice on a piece of paper or a spare bit of canvas. And as you can see, I'm using the very tip of the liner brush to do these lines. And you can see what's great about the liner brush is once it's loaded with ink, it keeps going. So you can get into these really nice repetitive movements and pull quite long, elegant lines. It's quite good for hatching and so on. And we're going to use this liner brush with the India ink to ink in our design. So again, I advise practicing, have a piece of paper nearby to avoid any stray ink. You can see a little bit of stray ink there, so that reminded me. Protect your design and practice. I find these longer lines work best on a slow out breath. It helps to steady the hand, but it can take a bit of practice. So just have a very fast time lapse here where I'm inking in, and I'm just making sure that my hand doesn't drag over any wet ink in order to avoid any kind of smearing of the ink. So sometimes I'm moving my hand around, moving myself around the design in order not to smear any ink. And yeah, there's pulling another long line. Sometimes you can pull the whole line if your hand and your arm is feeling fairly relaxed and fluid. Other times you have to complete a long line in a few steps. So this is just a time lapse of me working on all of the lines, and it's important to point out that the lines shouldn't be so thick. They should be thicker than some thick hair, but really like a fine pencil line, nothing too chunky or fat, because then you'll have a problem with the ink punching up through the paint film. Here I'm just using very small dashes when I'm indicating a very subtle change of value, like on the bridge of the nose, but I can go a bit heavier when it comes to these strong areas of shadow, like these, like the eye and the shadow under the nose, and so on. And it's quite enjoyable. It takes concentration. You have to be kind of locked into what you're doing. But it's a wonderful practice for getting confident with the liner brush and beginning to discover its qualities, because the liner brush is also not only very nice to use with ink, but also it's nice to use with egg tempera and with oil as well. And yeah, so this is an important thing, is to get comfortable with the liner brush. And I would advise, I will repeat, that it's very good to use the tip of the liner brush. So only the tip of the brush really is making contact, and that's enough to feed the paint from the brush hairs onto the canvas. You don't need to press with the brush, because if you press with the brush you will get a far stronger brush stroke, and that's not what you want for this particular stage of the painting, because we're just aiming to transfer the design. So I would really recommend practicing for 5 or 10 minutes on a piece of paper with the ink, and when you're warmed up, that's when to go in and begin. Don't start for the first time. If you've never used a liner brush before, don't start straight on your painting. Do some practicing like I did on the piece of paper, and that way you'll get a better result when you take it to transferring your design. It's important to have fidelity to the marks you put down with the charcoal, because again we're avoiding introducing copying errors to the process. And I thought it would be good to just show you the whole thing, to show you that I spare no pains on transferring the design and inking in. You might have the question, well, why ink in? And it's basically to preserve the lines, because the charcoal won't hold under the painting. Charcoal would dissolve under the imprimatura. So this is a way for us to make some indelible design marks. And here we go. You see some areas, some lines are stronger than others, because those lines can be, because they're strong design elements. Now we're going to move to the imprimatura. Naphthol scarlet or cadmium red, very strong. Mars violet, rusty. Burnt sienna, nice earthy brown red. And so, yeah, you could use a very strong red for a traditional Fuchsian mischtechnik, Fuchsian Brigid Marlin-esque mischtechnik, very strong red. Or you could add a bit more earth pigment to go more traditional. So I'm going for the full primary red, very strong luminous red, because we're going to do a traditional Fuchsian mischtechnik with these. But if you are aiming for a more old masters look, you could certainly use more like a raw umber or a burnt umber. So I'm putting a little bit here in this plastic dish, adding a little splosh of water. I advise that you test on a spare canvas or a piece of paper, test the strength and test the covering power of the paint, because it would be a real shame to do all of this work on your India ink and then come to it with the imprimatura and completely cover your lines up so that you can't see them. So you have to get into the practice of testing everything. So that's why I put these hatching strokes down. I can paint over them and say, whoop, do they show? Do they still appear? So let's have a look. Looking fine. Okay, so here I go. I take it from top to bottom in one stroke. I don't stop halfway through. I lick it from top to bottom. That way we get a nice consistent stroke. So I'm using a nice soft glazing brush, or a soft varnish brush as they're sometimes called. The bristles are not rough. They're very soft synthetic fibers. So there we have it. Now I'm going to let that dry and then assess whether it's actually the shade I want. Because I'm looking at it and thinking, I want to put a bit of Mars Violet in there, because the actual design, the photograph that I'm basing this on is quite dark, so I want to maybe drop the color, the value of this red down. So I'm mixing some Mars Violet into the Naphthol Scarlet for my second round, and you can see that I'm significantly darkening the value, because the actual reference that I'm using, she's a kind of dark lady, you know, it's not such a high key image. So again, I must test to make sure that I'm not covering everything up, but I know my pigments pretty well, so I was quite confident that I would be fine with this. And yeah, so here we go. I'm just putting it down. You might notice that I'm using a sort of diagonal stroke this time. If you're making multiple layers of an imprimatura, it's sometimes good to alternate the direction of the stroke, just so you get it into some more of the weave of the canvas. So I'm liking how this is looking now. It's still a very strong red. I can still definitely do that kind of traditional Fuchsian method, but these are what I would use if I wanted to go old masters. I'd use some earths. And here she is. This is ready to go with our optical greys, our tempera grassa or white oil paint.